My name is Anita Vaughn. I'm 63 years old, a widow, and for more than 4 decades, this house has been my safe place. Every corner carries a memory. Every wall echoes with stories of my family. But on that morning, everything I believed about safety and family began to collapse. It started with an ordinary routine. I was in the kitchen pouring myself coffee into a porcelain mug that once belonged to my mother. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, dancing on the cream-colored walls I had painted myself. It felt like any other day, until the sound of the doorbell broke the silence. When I opened the door, a man in his 50s stood there in blue overalls with a heavy toolbox. His name was David Miller, the plumber my son Ethan had recommended. At first, I thought he was here to fix a simple leak. He spoke calmly, reassured me that it might take some time, and went down into the basement to investigate. I continued cleaning the counters, listening to the faint echoes of his tools below. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. When he finally returned, his face was pale, his hands trembling. He set his toolbox on the floor, looked straight into my eyes, and spoke words that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, you need to gather your things and leave this house immediately. Do not tell your children where you are going." The words struck me harder than any blow. My children, Ethan and Rachel, the two people I had sacrificed my entire life for, the ones I trusted more than anyone. Why would a plumber say something like this about them? My voice caught in my throat as I tried to respond, but David's urgent expression silenced me. At that moment, the safe world I thought I lived in began to crumble, and I realized my story was about to change forever. To understand why David's warning shook me so deeply, you need to know what my life had become before that morning. My house, a 2-story place with cream walls and dark wooden furniture, had been my sanctuary for more than 40 years. I raised my children here and mourned my husband here and believed I would spend my final years surrounded by familiar comfort. But lately, comfort had turned into loneliness. My son, Ethan, now in his late 30s, works for a construction company. He leaves before sunrise and returns long after dark. At dinner, he barely speaks, answering my questions with one-word replies. His eyes avoid mine, his shoulders tense. He used to laugh easily as a boy, always building toy cars in the yard, but now there is a heaviness about him that keeps me at a distance. My daughter, Rachel, is younger, 38, and returned home 6 months ago after her divorce. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a sadness that clung to her like a second skin. Most days she hides in her childhood bedroom, emerging only for a quick snack or to collect laundry. She says she needs time to heal, to find herself again, but the spark I once saw in her eyes has dimmed. She studied chemistry years ago before she married, but now she avoids all conversations about her past or her future. As for me, my days follow a predictable rhythm. Wake up at 6, make breakfast no one eats, water the plants, clean the house, prepare lunch, read a book, and cook dinner that we eat in silence. The house, once filled with noise and laughter, feels hollow. I tell myself this is only a phase, that my children still love me, but sometimes the silence feels like a stranger creeping in, erasing the family I thought I knew. On the morning everything changed, I noticed something unusual. The upstairs bathroom faucet had been dripping through the night. It was not the steady rhythm of a normal leak, but an irregular sound that kept waking me up. When I went downstairs for breakfast, I saw a damp spot spreading across the dining room ceiling. Small drops of water fell onto the table every few seconds. It worried me because that bathroom had been completely renovated just 2 years earlier. I called Ethan at work to ask if we should contact the renovation company. His voice sounded tense, as if I had interrupted something important. "Mom, just call a plumber," he said quickly. "I cannot leave work right now." When I reminded him that we had a warranty from the company that had done the job, he snapped back. "No, do not call them. I will send you the number of someone else I know." It felt strange, but I did not press him. Lately, he had been irritable, and I had learned not to push. Half an hour later, Ethan sent me a text with the name and number of a plumber. David Miller. According to him, David had excellent references. I dialed immediately. A calm voice answered, "Good morning, this is David. How can I help you?" I explained about the leak, and he promised to come within an hour. Relieved, I prepared the house. I moved furniture away from the drip, placed bowls to catch the falling water, and kept glancing at the ceiling. It seemed like a small problem, one that would soon be solved. I had no idea that the call I made that morning would reveal the darkest truth of my life. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw a man in his 50s, medium height, with graying hair and kind eyes behind glasses. He wore blue overalls and carried a toolbox that looked well used. "Mrs. Vaughn, I'm David Miller, the plumber. May I come in?" he said with a polite smile. I guided him to the dining room and pointed at the damp spot on the ceiling. David tilted his head, studied it for a moment, and said he would need to check the upstairs bathroom and then the basement. His tone was calm and professional, so I felt reassured. He went upstairs first, and I heard the clinking of tools. A few minutes later, he came down with a thoughtful expression. "Ma'am, I need to look at the main pipes in the basement," he said. I showed him the door near the kitchen, and he disappeared below. I continued cleaning the counters, listening to the faint echoes of his tools below. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. When he finally returned, his face was pale, his hands trembling. He set his toolbox on the floor, looked straight into my eyes, and spoke words that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, you need to gather your things and leave this house immediately. Do not tell your children where you are going." For a while, I heard the distant metallic sounds of his tools, sometimes tapping, sometimes dragging. It comforted me, thinking he was solving the problem. I even started preparing lunch, hoping the smell might coax Rachel out of her room. But when David came back upstairs nearly an hour later, his expression had completely changed. On the floor, took off his glasses and wiped them slowly. Then he looked me directly in the eyes. "Ma'am, what I found down there is not a plumbing issue. There is something installed in your basement that should not be there." Confused, I followed him downstairs. In the farthest corner behind the furnace, David shined his flashlight at the pipes. My breath caught. Among the ordinary plumbing lines was a metal box the size of a toaster connected to thin plastic tubes. Inside, faintly visible, were compartments holding strange colored liquids. Tiny digital timers blinked red. "This," David whispered, "is connected directly to your ventilation system, and it is not meant to keep you healthy." I stared at the strange device, my heart pounding in my chest. The thin tubes snaked up into the ceiling, vanishing into the air ducts that led to my bedroom. I reached out with trembling fingers and touched one. It was warm, as though something had recently flowed through it. "What is this supposed to do?" I whispered. David's voice was steady but grave. "Ma'am, in my 20 years of plumbing and ventilation work, I have seen a lot. This is no purifier, no repair, and certainly no harmless device. It is designed to release substances into the air you breathe slowly, carefully over time. The symptoms would look like natural aging, fatigue, headaches, weakness. You would never suspect the real cause." My knees buckled and I leaned against the furnace for support. For months, I had been exhausted. My head often ached, and sometimes I felt too weak to climb the stairs. I told myself it was part of growing older. But now, faced with this metal box, I could not ignore the truth. Someone wanted me sick. Someone wanted me gone. David turned the flashlight to the digital timers. "Judging from the residue and wear," he said quietly, "this has been running for at least 8 or 9 months. My stomach dropped. That was exactly when my health had begun to change. But who could do this? My voice broke. Who would have access to the house, enough time to install it, and the knowledge to make it work? David hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Someone who knows construction, someone who understands chemistry." The names struck me like lightning. Ethan, Rachel, my children, the people I had trusted most. For a long moment, I could not speak. My mind kept circling the same impossible thought. My own children. Ethan with his tired smile, Rachel with her downcast eyes. Could they really be behind this device? I wanted to deny it, but the facts were too precise, too deliberate. David touched my arm gently. "Ma'am,
Listen to me, you are in danger right now. Whoever installed this system knows exactly what it does. If they suspect you have discovered it, they might act quickly. You need to leave this house immediately. Do not tell your children where you are going. Take only what is essential. I stared around a basement, then at the familiar stairs leading up to my kitchen. This had been my home for 40 years. I had painted these walls, stored Christmas decorations here, folded laundry here. It felt surreal to think of running away from it as if it were a trap. But David's voice was firm. Please, Mrs. Vaughn, pack your documents, some clothes, your identification. We can come back later with the police. Right now, your safety is more important than anything else. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs. Every step felt like I was walking out of the life I had known. In my bedroom, I pulled out a small bag, stuffed it with my passport, bank papers, and a few personal items. On the dresser, a photo of Ethan, Rachel, and me from last Christmas smiled back at me. I slipped it into the bag, not for comfort, but as a reminder of how blind love can be. Then I followed David out into the sunlight, leaving my home behind. We drove in silence for several blocks before David pulled into a modest hotel on the edge of town. He paid for the room in his own name and handed me the key. Inside, the space felt small but safe. A bed, a desk, heavy curtains that blocked the view from outside. For the first time in years, I locked a door behind me with trembling hands. Sitting across from David at the small table, I tried to steady my breathing. My thoughts kept racing back through recent months, replaying conversations that now carried new meaning. Ethan had suggested more than once that I should consider selling the house. "It's too big for one person, Mom," he said. "The upkeep must be difficult." At the time, I thought he was worried about me. Now it sounded like he was evaluating property value. Rachel, too, had asked pointed questions. "Do you have enough savings for medical expenses, Mom? Have you thought about long-term care?" I assumed it was concern, but perhaps she was calculating what would be left after I was gone. I pressed my face into my hands, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My children, who once clung to me when they were afraid, might have been planning my death while sitting at my dinner table. David's voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, denial will only put you in greater danger. The signs are there, and now that you see them, you cannot go back to pretending." By the following afternoon, David insisted we needed more than suspicion. Without evidence, the police might not believe a word of our story. He offered to return to the house under the pretense of checking whether his repair had held. I was terrified for him, but he assured me it was safer if he went alone. Before leaving, he promised to take photographs of the device and, if possible, collect samples of the chemicals. I spent those hours pacing the small hotel room. Every creak in the hallway made me jump. When David finally returned, he carried a folder tucked under his arm and a camera hanging from his neck. His face was grim. He spread the photographs across the desk. Each image showed the device from a different angle: the tubes, the colored liquids, the digital timers.
The evidence was undeniable. But that was not all. As he adjusted his glasses, his voice dropped. "While I was in the basement, I overheard your children talking in the kitchen. They thought I was still working downstairs." My stomach clenched. What did they say? David's eyes held mine steadily. "Ethan told Rachel that you had been acting strangely, that your answers were evasive. Rachel said they could not risk waiting another 2 months. She suggested moving to Plan B." Plan B? The words made me shiver. What did that mean? David shook his head. They did not explain, but the tone was clear. They were willing to speed things up. I sank into the chair, my hands gripping the edge. My own children were plotting a faster way to end my life. That evening, my phone began to buzz with calls and messages. First, Rachel. "Mom, are you okay? You've been gone longer than usual." Then, Ethan. "Where exactly are you? Why aren't you answering us?" Their words looked concerned on the screen, but after what David had overheard, they felt like traps disguised as care. I typed back as calmly as I could. "I am fine. The bank was crowded. I will be home later." My hands trembled as I hit send. David leaned over to read the screen. "They are already monitoring your movements," he said. "We have to be careful. If they think you know, they might destroy the device or act impulsively." My phone rang again. This time it was Ethan. His voice on the line was tight, stripped of warmth. "Mom, where are you really?
The bank closed at 5. What have you been doing? Since when do I have to report my movements to my children? I replied, trying to sound steady. A pause, then a tone I had never heard from him before. Especially when you start acting so suspicious, Mom. I hung up quickly, my heart pounding. David met my eyes. They know something is wrong, and if they have a plan B, it will not be subtle. I realized in that moment that I was no longer just a mother in danger. I was a witness, and my children were predators closing in. The next evening, David and I decided to leave the hotel and head directly to the police station. We had the photos, the samples, and my testimony. It was time to hand everything over before my children made their next move. David parked his truck 2 blocks away from the hotel's back exit to avoid being seen. We would slip out through the restaurant kitchen and walk to the truck on foot. As we stepped into the alley, the air felt heavy, as if it knew what was about to happen. My handbag was clutched to my chest like a lifeline. David kept scanning the shadows, his phone in one hand, ready to dial 911 if needed. When we reached the corner, we stopped dead. Next to the truck stood Ethan, his phone in one hand, and what looked like a tire iron in the other. His posture was tense, eyes fixed on the alley. We backed up quickly, but footsteps echoed behind us. I turned and saw Rachel blocking our escape, dressed in a hoodie, her hair pulled back. In her right hand glinted a large syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Hello, Mom," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You have been very hard to find." My throat went dry. "Rachel, please, I raised you. I love you. How can you do this?" "Love does not pay debts, Mom," she answered coldly. "Love does not give me financial stability. Love is not going to save Ethan from the men who want to break his legs." She stepped closer, the syringe steady. Ethan shifted his grip on the tire iron. For a moment, everything slowed. I thought of the photo from last Christmas, of bedtime stories and scraped knees. Then, the sound of sirens cut through the night, growing louder. Police cars appeared at both ends of the alley, lights flashing blue and red. Ethan froze. Rachel's eyes widened. The trap they had set for me had become a trap for them instead. Within seconds, officers surrounded the alley, guns drawn, voices sharp. They ordered Ethan and Rachel to drop what they were holding. Ethan let the tire iron clatter onto the pavement and raised his hands. Rachel hesitated, gripping the syringe, panic flashing across her face. One of the officers stepped forward slowly. "Miss, put it down. Step away." Finally, she dropped it, her hands trembling as they were pulled behind her in handcuffs. I sat in the back of an ambulance that night, wrapped in a blanket while paramedics checked my vitals. David stood nearby, giving his statement, showing the photographs he had already emailed to himself before Ethan destroyed his camera. When detectives later searched the house with a warrant, they found traces of chemicals in the ventilation ducts, and, most damning of all, a notebook hidden in Rachel's room. Page after page recorded my symptoms, almost like a laboratory experiment. Dates, times, headaches, fatigue, confusion, my decline documented by my own children. The trial took place 6 months later. In court, the truth spilled out. Ethan owed more than $100,000 in gambling debts. Rachel had lost everything in her divorce after her husband proved her infidelity. Together, they had planned my slow death to gain access to nearly $800,000 in insurance, savings, and property value. Their defense centered on financial desperation, but the jury saw the cold calculation for what it was. Ethan was sentenced to 25 years in prison, Rachel to 20 years. Neither showed real remorse. They looked at me across the courtroom, not as a mother they once loved, but as the obstacle that had cost them their freedom. After the trial, I knew I could never return to that house. Every room carried the shadow of betrayal. I sold it, even though it had been my home for more than 40 years, and moved to a small apartment in a coastal town where the air smelled of salt and freedom. From my balcony, I can see the ocean, endless and steady, reminding me that life continues even after the deepest wounds. David Miller became more than the plumber who saved me. He became a true friend. We write to each other often, and he visits whenever he can. He helped me see that not everyone in this world will betray trust for money. Some strangers can become family, while those bound by blood can turn into strangers more dangerous than any outsider. At times, I still ask myself if there were signs I missed, small warnings that should have told me what Ethan and Rachel were planning. But I have learned that when we love someone, we explain away the suspicious moments. That is not weakness. It's part of being human, and manipulators know how to use that love against us. Now, when I sit watching the sun slip into the sea, I remind myself of the hardest lesson of all. True family is not measured by blood, but by actions of care and protection. If this story touched you, please like, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means more than you know.